Welcome back, Poker YouTube, to another hand review video featuring the Lodge. This is a 5-10 game that I did cut I think a hand or two out from before. So let's go ahead and get started right into the action rather. All right, so Max in the small blind decides to 3-bet with Jack-8 offsuit against High's 9-8 suited on the button. 9-8 suited, definitely a great hand to open on the button. We're pretty much opening it from everywhere. Of course, guys with the live stream games and especially playing like nit games and stuff that they're playing, they're going to be quite a bit looser. Max is definitely more aggro. A lot of you guys might try to mimic what they're doing. I wouldn't use Jack-8 offsuit, definitely not. Would rather have a hand like Jack-10 suited at worst. Like maybe you could argue Jack-9 suited, but that's getting a little bit loose. Typically, you do want to be a little bit more linear, meaning just not only your premiums, but then other very good hands as well when you're out of position. Max decides a 3-bet, and I believe we did get a call. All right, so we've got 1,300 in the pot. A little bit less than 3 on the SPR. Pretty good board for Max overall. He's going to like boards with definitely the king on them for sure. Not that his opponent can't have them, but Max definitely has more of like the top set, ace-ace, ace-king, if you will. So he's probably going to continue here a lot. And, High's in a position where he does have a flush draw. Depending on Max sizing, we'll see what he does here. Really good players will go, I think, really small here, and he is. Simply, like, the reason for it is the pot is already so bloated that you don't have to bet a lot early on to get stacks in by the turn of river. Typically, when you're out of position, you would like to shrink the number of streets that you play. It does make a lot of sense, especially if you're deeper, but if you're shallow, it doesn't matter as much. So he does go small. And you're going to be able to do that with range in this particular spot. He's definitely doing this with every hand he basically has. So to combat that, to not allow your opponent to get away with just range betting in the spot, like you do have to have some aggressive plays. This could be one of them. I mean, obviously on a king high board, like I said, you're not going to have on king 6 deuce as many top set combos, aces, or even some, like you'll have some of the ace king, but not all of the ace king that Max will have. But you can have middle set, bottom set, can have some decent king X hands, can have some flush draws. So with an SPR this low, like, could you call and then plan to float and then try to steal on the turn? Or call and then, of course, if you realize equity with your turn flush, that's great as well. But yeah, I think in these spots, a lot of players, they'll call against the small sizing a lot in a pretty transparent manner. Like you're going to want to get more aggressive with the guys that are range betting because I think that they know they need to range bet in spots like this, but they don't know how to act when facing raise a lot of time. Like, they don't know how to properly defend. So yeah, this is an interesting spot. Now in the live low stakes games, how do we apply it? How do we apply this situation to those games, guys? Basically, if you see an opponent bet quarter pot ever, they're usually very transparent with their sizings. It means that they're very capped. It means that they're usually very weak. I would look to attack that spot with relentless aggression. So if I'm in high spot here and somebody that's I would consider a weaker player is in Crypto Max's spot and they bet really small, yes, do you occasionally run into the top set that they're trying to like lure you into the trap with? Sure. But for the most part, like it tends to be a lot of like under pairs to the king. It tends to be like some ace queen suited, ace jack suited that aren't essentially flush draws. Like they're just basically air at that point. I would look to attack relentlessly with a lot of my range. So we'll see what High does. Looks like he's just going to call and play position. That's fine as well. I think that's a totally viable option, as I mentioned. So 3 on the turn shouldn't benefit Max too much as far as like he doesn't have like really 2 pairs or plus a whole lot here. It's really just like the very like he has occasional top set, of course. With him being as aggressive as he is, can he show up with an occasional 5-4 suited that he now has turned the straight? Yeah, but it's quite rare, guys. So really, like if he continues here, he's basically saying that he usually has a king or better. So he has like a lot of like king X, and then he has maybe some spade draws. Maybe he also has some air mixed in there. He could be using some pairs that he thinks don't have showdown value. something like fives or fours, like he could continue with here with the straight draws. But yeah, we'll see what he ends up doing. He's going to continue. Looks like he bets 1,200 into 2,000. So he's starting to polarize, which makes sense. He's starting to size up a little bit here. This is a spot where if you believe you have an aggressive enough of an opponent, I like the idea of actually jamming here. If you're high with only 2.8 left, you're going to put your opponent in a pretty tough spot if he doesn't have a king or better, essentially. So yeah, if I see this line, I think this is a spot where I'm calling, planning to float against an aggressive opponent and probably trying to steal. We'll see what high does here, though. Yeah, so he's definitely thinking about it. He's trying to put max on a range, obviously. It looks like he's just calling. I mean, I don't know. It's going to be tough. Like, if he obviously faces a triple on the river and he doesn't hit his hand, he can't call. I think he could have played the hand a little bit more aggressive, either flop or turn. You're also allowing Max to possibly realize equity a little too easily in this spot. So maybe he has a plan, we'll see here, to like kind of pull a double float. Doesn't have to, now that he hits his hand, of course. And Max now has a decision. I mean, High only has 1.6 left. I mean, that's a good number if you're going to triple here to get him off of hands like pocket nines, pocket eights, like basically one pair hand below the king. He's never going to fold a king or better at this point. So even if I'm in Crypto Max's spot here, and this is definitely a really exploitative play, guys, but let's say they both had 10,000 left. If I felt that I was really just trying to get my opponent off of one pair hands that were worse than the king, I actually would consider betting small here because I think that they are just going to fold those hands no matter what sizing you use. If they have a king, you probably would have to put in all 10,000 to get them to consider to fold that hand, but they're never going to fold a flush or straight. It doesn't matter how much you bet here, they're never going to fold that. So it kind of works out for Max if High did not have the flush and he did have a one pair hand. For him to only have 1.6 left, but I don't think Max is gonna check here. He can't win at showdown, and then obviously he's gonna get snapped off and see the bad news. Yeah, and I think I mean, like I said, it's calling down just to hit the hand with that low of an SPR it's not the greatest line in my opinion. Like, I understand floating flop. I would look, even if he's not playing the flip, if he's calling just to evaluate turn, like, I think turn, that's a good spot to just get it in. Like I said, yes, your opponent will never fold a king or better, but they're going to fold everything that's worse than that. And they'll still have, like, especially if your opponent bets really small on the flop and you know that they're, whether it's an unknown or whether it's a player that you know to be a little bit weaker, they're not going to use proper, like, game theory optimal sizings like that. If they're going to go really small on the flop, you need to attack them with more aggression. And then you need to plan to attack the better players at least some of the time on the flop, but also plan to attack them with some turn raises. And, like, would you, of course, in a perfect world, want to show up with at least, like, a combo draw in that spot? Like, would High want to have, let's say, like, he picks up a straight draw with his flush draw, or he picks up a pair with his flush draw? Sure. But you're not going to always have that. Like, you're not going to always be able to wait for the perfect turn. When you're playing against a better player, you kind of have to take those thinner spots and run with them at least some of the time. So I would have liked to seen him jam turn. He's, fortunate to get there, though, and does win a pretty nice pot. Let's see if we can expedite this a little. All right, moving on to the next hand. All right, so Big Daddy Chaz is in there with a raise. And again, guys, this is a 5-10 game, but I believe they do have multiple straddles on, so it's going to play a little bit bigger. But again, the concepts that I will be discussing within this game, yes, it's going to be a more aggressive game than what maybe a lot of you are used to, like in the 1-3, even some of the 2-5 settings. But we're still going to discuss proper sizings as far as, like, exploitatively speaking. We're still going to be able to discuss frequencies as far as like if an opponent or if a population bets too often in a spot, if they check back too often in a spot, how can we exploit them? So this video with these guys, it's still going to be very relatable. So Big Daddy Chaz does make a raise in the hijack with Jack 8. So a little bit loose, but like I said, guys, live stream game, they're going to be a little bit looser. And if you feel you have total control of the table, if you feel like there's not a lot of 3-betting, squeezing going on, if there's not really any other tough players at the table, you can definitely loosen up and get wider like this, especially if you feel like you can steal a lot of pots post-flop. CryptoMax calls on the button with 10-9 offsuit. Definitely not standard, but he wants to play pots in position on Big Daddy Chaz, I think. Corey in the big blind, I think, makes a good decision to go ahead and squeeze here at the ace-jack offsuit. There are, honestly, a couple good things that come out of this, guys. You lower the SPR, so it takes away a little bit of that positional advantage that your opponents have in the hijack and the button there. It also narrows your opponent's range a little bit to where, essentially you find out more about where your opponent is now in the hand. But simply put, I just think that in a game that's more aggressive and a little bit looser, a hand like ace-jack offsuit is going to go up in value. It's going to be more of a value 3-bet at this point. And he's not relying on the equity of his hand. You guys just call in this spot a lot thinking okay, well, if I have a good hand, I want to hit my ace or jack, I can win a decent pot. That's not how we want to think about this. We want to think that, okay, we know that Big Daddy Chaz is opening loose. We know CryptoMax is calling loose. We want to take advantage of that dead money and possibly win the pot now. And if we don't, we get a lower SPR situation with a hand that's doing really well against their calling range, and hopefully we end up heads up, worst case scenario, where now we can rely on more of our skill edge than just our equity and us having to hit with our hand. So this is a really good spot, I think, for a squeeze. I like what Corey's doing here. Big Daddy Chaz folds. Max is going to call on the button with absolute position. So yeah, we get a good scenario. We get heads up against a player that likely has a much wider range. Max is one that is going to 3-bet with a lot of his range. So if he's just calling on the button, guys, if you run into a player like this and they're just calling on the button, they're probably going to be at the bottom of their range with a lot of junky stuff. 10-9 offsuit being one of those combos. All right, so not the greatest flop for Corey, given that Max is likely to have more of the two pairs or better at this spot. The thing that you guys got to keep in mind, though, even if your opponent has more of the 2 pairs or better, this is still a pretty advantageous spot for Corey simply because he is going to have a narrower range. He's going to have less air. Max is so wide that he's going to have a lot of air in the spot. I would be a little cautious, though, if I'm Corey, simply because we are really deep here. For a 3-bet pot, the SPR is roughly, it's over 10. I don't want to do, let's see, quick math here. It's roughly 13 and a half. That's really high for a 3-bet pot, guys. And when you're playing against a good, aggressive player that has position on you, you got to be really mindful of these spots. You have to be a little bit more protective of your stack rather than just your equity. So if I'm Corey here, I actually don't even hate the idea of checking range to Max, knowing that he does probably have more of a nut advantage with more of the 2 pairs or better. So with ace-jack, it's a little tricky. If we are going to check range here, we can't just continue with only our good hands, like our over pairs and our flush draws, our ace-king. You're going to have some hands that can call him. I think ace-jack does have some showdown value against a player that is wider like Corey. It's kind of like one of those you call and evaluate turn. You're not going to take ace-jack all the way to the river as just ace-high, more than likely, but you can call. He might slow down on turn. You could mix in check raises with a lot of the overpair combos, or I'm sorry, not even just overpairs, guys. You could do that as well. And that's definitely a valuable option against a very aggressive player. But you can also take some of the overcard hands that you would share cards with your value combos. So it's actually pretty good to have an ace and a jack here, because basically, I don't want to get too complex with this, but let's just say that if I had the ace of spades instead of the ace of clubs, I think it's actually a pretty decent check raise candidate against a player as aggressive and wide as Max, because you remove some of his high equity continues as far as the nut flush draw combos. You also can take that ace of spades and you can use spade turns to your advantage, and you can semi-bluff with those as well. You also have the 2 overcards to the likely best top pair hand. So it's really a matter of like not so much thinking about what our actual hand is in the spot. Think about if you know your opponent is a more aggressive opponent here, guys, then it's more about playing him and not so much playing your cards. Like if you know this is a spot where it's going to be a high stab situation, then you're going to want to increase your check raise frequency quite a bit. So I'm curious to see what Corey does. I mean, honestly, a lot of players will just bet here. I'm not saying that's a terrible option, but when we're this deep against an aggressive player, I think checking makes a lot of sense. So I like that Corey does go ahead and check. I would hope that he's going to check with everything in his range at least a little bit. Another quick note, guys, this is also why it's important to make sure you do show up with the occasional like 6-5 suited when you squeeze in that spot. Some pocket sixes, some fives, some of like the ace-5 suited, ace-4 suited, because you want to be able to play tough on boards like this against players who can have a lot of board coverage here. So Max is going to bet 500. He's going to bet half pot. And like I said, he's setting the kind of price where Corey's going to have to defend a fair amount of his range. I think check call is a viable option. If you think Max is wide enough and aggressive enough, I honestly think you can take a lot of your range and check raise him here. Yes, am I nitpicking? Would I like to have at least the ace of spades, maybe the jack of spades? If I had the ace of clubs, yeah, I would like to have a spade blocker maybe. Some would argue like, okay, well, you're blocking some of his draws then, but that's fine. Like a player like Max is going to be betting, looking to continue or play big pots with a lot of his draws. So I think that you can use this hand if you think Max is wide enough in the spot to check raise. Folding, I think, it's an option, but I think that it's going to be a little bit weak, and you're going to have to find enough combos in your range. Like, do we have enough overpairs to the board? Do we have enough ace-king? Yeah, in theory, I think ace-jack could be folded here, but that's against somebody that I think is a little bit more reasonable. So, what I'll say about this hand, guys, is that bottom line, I think Corey's played it pretty well. If you were to believe that a player in Max's spot on the button is much more reasonable, is not as wide, is not as likely to stab when checked to. If it's a much tighter player, if it's somebody that maybe is a little bit more straightforward when checked to, then it's a really easy check fold spot, guys. Like, we don't need to try to get fancy with our play there. But if it's somebody that's more aggressive, you guys need to find a lot of check raises in the spot against these kind of guys. Really, like, you could argue taking an incredible amount of your range and just check raising even a little bit smaller. You could take and go really polar, and you could take the best overpairs here and then better. So like if you do have the occasional 2 pairs or better, and you can take some combo draws and you can raise him really large in the spot just because it is a high SPR situation. So let's say Max bets 500. I mean, guys, you could honestly make it somewhere between like 2,500 and 5,000 with, let's say, like your queens are better. Maybe even like honestly your jacks or tens are better because Max didn't 3-bet pre-flop. He's the kind of player that would 3-bet those hands a ton. So you could take like your pocket tens are better. You could take then your best spade draws, I would say, and then some of, like, let's say you had like 8-7 of diamonds. You could take some of those straight draws, some of like the ace-4 diamonds, ace-3 of diamonds, where you have the gutter, the overcard, the backdoor diamonds. You could include those as well, and you could go really large and set up a 2-street game where you basically check bomb this flop, and then you rip a lot of turns on Max, and you put him in a really bad situation. It's likely he's going to fold the flop to that sizing a ton, but if he doesn't, you're going to have hands that have a lot of equity against his range. So yeah, there's a lot you can do there. Just keep in mind, though, the main point of this particular hand, guys, is if you're up against a really aggressive player and you 3-bet and they call in position, you can't just check fold all your air. They're going to be wide enough, they're going to be stabbing often enough that you need to get aggressive with them, and you need to fight fire with fire in these spots. And like I said, if you have some hands that have showdown value, you'll mix in some check calls, but ace-jack starts to fall towards the bottom of your range that you would consider more check raise, or maybe you do mix in some check fold if you think that your opponent's a little bit more reasonable. So Max scoops a pot, and yeah, credit to him. Guys, if I'm at a table where I feel I can control the action, I'll get away with playing a range this wide. I'll get away with stabbing a lot in spots where I think players are just going to check fold their air. And if you're in Max's spot and there's a player in Corey's spot if you're in a 1-3 or 2-5 or even a 5-10 game, and that player's a little bit more straightforward or he's nittier and they check the flop as a 3-better, you can know with a good amount of confidence that they're likely not going for check raise. They tend to play much more straightforward in 3-bet pots. So when check to, the exploit is for you to then bet a lot of your range. You don't have to bet very large. You can bet large, but you just need to bet more often, because if your opponent's going to check to you, that means they're likely very capped. You need to go ahead and bet and take advantage of that. Let's move on to the next hand. Looks like High's going to put in a raise. I think there's a straddle on. So he puts in a raise in the hijack of pocket fives. Pretty reasonable. CryptoMax calls in the cutoff with 8-4 offsuit. So he's definitely V-pipping probably like close to 100% of hands. I think he feels like he probably has a very large post-flop skill edge at this point. Cinnabon in the big blind. Looks like he's going to go ahead and squeeze to 400, I believe. Yeah, absolutely the right play with jacks. In this type of environment, you're going to treat jacks like they're pretty much aces. It's a huge hand, so it's great position and great decision, rather, to go ahead and squeeze here. So it looks like High's going to call, Max is going to fold. And we have an SPR of about 7. So a little bit, definitely higher than what you'd see in a standard 3-bet pot. When you get in these aggressive live games, you are just going to see deeper stacks. And, that's the great thing about Arch City Poker, guys, is that a lot of our play and a lot of our strategy is tailored towards playing with deep stacks, effectively speaking, trying to win bigger pots, increase your win rate in the games that you're playing within. So, King 9-3 texture. And, I'm going to try to not bounce all over the place here. Let's look at it from Cinnabon's perspective, like as the pre-flop aggressor, because that's what we're going to be the majority of the time when we're playing, guys. So, this is a board that we can definitely bet. King 9-3 is definitely going to favor us quite a bit. If you wanted to go the route of checking your range, though, out of position to your opponent, that is a really good strategy, in my opinion, especially if it is against an unknown in a 1-3 or 2-5 game, or it's against somebody that is just a weaker player, recreational, maybe more ABC, straightforward, because they're going to tell you how they feel about their hand a lot of the time when you check to them. Now, it is more of a static board, so your opponent's going to be able to hide their hand strength a little bit because there's not a lot of runouts that they fear. Like, there aren't a lot of nut-changing runouts, whereas if it was King 9-6 with a suit, much more dynamic, it's wet. Their sizings are going to be very transparent. If they bet larger, then they have a hand that they really like. If they bet smaller, then obviously they're going to be a little bit more capped. You can attack that spot a little bit more often. So on King 9-3, can we bet? Sure. Is betting range small here a GTO type of play? It is. But I think we can check. And honestly, guys, these players, and by these players, I mean most of your live low-stakes playing population, they still are going to act straightforward in 3-bet pots for the most part. If you check to them and they check back, they very likely don't have top pair or better. And so then you can feel much more comfortable about your jacks. And you can develop a 2-street strategy to where you can a lot of times go bet and get 2 streets of value. Or you can bet turn, then evaluate river and see where you're at. But betting out here, it's, like I said, it's fine in theory, but I think the best way to exploit weaker players is to check to them. They're going to give you perfect information. There was a video I think I watched when I was making videos for runatwants.com, and Ben Solsky, Sauce, one of the greatest no-limit players, greatest poker players ever to play the game, incredible IQ, poker IQ. He's outstanding. But I remember something that stuck with me a long time ago when he mentioned that if you are playing against what you believe, and I'm paraphrasing here, guys, if you're playing against what you believe are weaker opponents, or if you're playing against a weaker opponent, a recreational player, if you will, they will usually tell you where they're at if they're checked to. Like, when it's checked to them, they're not going to get too tricky in that spot. They're not going to understand, like, that they need to be balanced. So checking to your opponents in the live low-stakes environments it's going to be a very powerful tool. So it's not that Cinnabon made a bad play here. He actually made, honestly, the game theory optimal play, betting, I think, 300 into the $900 pot. But I would like to check here. I think High will act pretty straightforward in this spot from kind of what I can tell. And I don't know if he's a weaker player or not, but I should actually correct that and just say, like, I think most players in that spot will act quite straightforward, as I pointed out. So Cinnabon is going to take it down. Not too crazy of a hand. So let's move on to the next hand. Do one more here, I think. Looks like Mr. Longlegs in the big blind. I guess it gets folded to him in the big blind with 8-7 suited. So it's kind of a weird spot. I think you have the straddles on, but this will happen. Sometimes you'll run into a game where you have like the third blind in or a straddle. Looks like Markin Chips calls. So yeah, this is a spot where a lot of you will misplay this. Let's just say like this type of spot where you're possibly allowing a player in behind you. So like a similar situation would be, let's say like middle position was somebody that could raise a hand like 8-7 suited, and then you're next to act, let's say like in the hijack with ace-7 suited. You guys are calling way too often in these spots, trying to just bink your hand. You're trying just to rely on your equity to win, and you're allowing the players in position on you to then be incentivized to enter the pot as well. And so now you're sandwiched in between the preflop aggressor and at least one player that has position on you, and you basically have to hit to win. Like, it's going to be hard to steal pots multi-way. It's a great spot for Markin Chips here to 3-bet and try to either win the pot now preflop or isolate a player with a hand that has some playability to it. So I don't like the call here. Big Daddy Chaz looks like he calls with ace-5 offsuit in the straddle. I mean, again, guys, I understand he's in the straddle. He's getting a decent price, and he has position on these two. I think this is a great spot to honestly go ahead and put in the squeeze. You have a hand that doesn't have a lot of playability multi-way. You have a good blocker in the ace. It's a really good spot to try to take down the pot now. And if you don't, you might end up heads up a lot of the time. And you have position, worst case scenario, so it's not too bad. So let's look at it from the perspective of Mr. Longlegs, since he is technically the preflop aggressor. And we get a dynamic flop of 8-6 deuce. And what I mentioned before, guys, it's a powerful tool to check to your opponent's out of position, even if there are multiple opponents, because it's even better then because they're going to act more straightforward because they're multi-way, because they're pretty much supposed to. They're just going to in that spot. So we have a really good candidate for either check call or check raise here, depending on what happens. My plan, if I was Mr. Longlegs, would be to check. And if there's 465 in the pot, let's say there's a bet of half pot or less, I think it's a really good spot to check raise with this hand. Use your top pair as essentially like a set or two pairs or top pair blocker. You have backdoor straight flush draw to go with it. You apply a lot of pressure. You can potentially get them to fold a good bit of equity. So, is it still like a good check call candidate? Do we have to take all of our like decent hands like this and check raise? No, because in theory, if you do this, when you go to check call, you have nothing of any kind of value or strength. But we're not really worried about balance, guys. Like, if we think there are transparent stabs with wider ranges, we want to attack with more check raises. Now, if we face a $500 pot size bet, that's a lot different. We have to then reevaluate where we're at. So Mr. Longlegs, I believe, does check. Really good job by him. Markin Chips is going to bet with the nut flush draw, backdoor straight draw, over card to the board. I think that's totally reasonable. Big Daddy Chaz folds. And so, yeah, again, and this is the one thing I will say, guys. If they were heads up, I think I would check raise a lot. I failed to mention, and this is my fault as the instructor, that if you're multi-way, larger sizings, the threshold for that will start to shrink. And what I mean is that half pot heads up is, I would consider that usually like a little bit of a weaker stab on average. It doesn't mean that you won't ever run into a good hand, but just on average, it'll be a little bit of a weaker range or a cap range. If you're multi-way, though, half pot tends to be a larger sizing. So if I were to properly evaluate this spot the first time, what I would very likely do in Mr. Longlegs spot is just check call here, because Markin Chips shows a lot of strength by betting when check to, when he's sandwiched in between Mr. Longlegs and Big Daddy Chaz. Like, he still has Big Daddy Chaz to worry about. He still has to worry about Mr. Longlegs having a check raise range. So, yeah, that's a spot where he is showing some strength. I would think that he's not as weak here, but I still think our hand has enough equity against his bet to call, especially for half pot. So he does call. I think that's absolutely the right play. So now we check, and I think Mark and Chips quickly check behind. That's a huge mistake, guys. When we still have 3K left effective, SPR is essentially a little bit over 3. It's going to be hard to play for stacks on the river if check 2. Like basically what will happen is this gets checked through. Let's say Mr. Longlegs checks and he has showdown value, and now we bet like 3x essentially. It's hard to get somebody to call for that. It's much better in this spot to continue betting, but I want to stick with the perspective of the preflop aggressor. So Mark and Chips very quickly checks back. Honestly, I might get in trouble here because I would think, like, if I didn't have showdown value, I could get in trouble because that really quick check to me is usually 90% or more of the time a timing tell, guys. Like, they usually would take time to think about it. A lot of weaker players won't think about what happens if they hit the flush when they bet with the flush draw. They'll also, the vast majority of the time, keep betting. So when he very quickly checks back here, I actually wouldn't give him credit for a flush almost ever. But do we have a hand that can get worse to call for value? No, I think we would check and we would look to bluff catch the river here, and we would get into trouble because depending on his sizing, we're probably going to call a lot of the time. So I think Mr. Longlegs has honestly played this hand really well. Looks like Mark and Chips bets, I think 400 or 500 it looks like. He bets 475, so roughly half pot. You know, he could be doing this with... It's hard to put him on a lot. Like, he shouldn't have a jack all that often. Would he 3-bet with a hand like 9s or 10s? Like, is he value betting an 8? Like, it's... You know, would he check back enough flushes? I actually think against half pot here, it feels, in most situations here, I think it would be a little empty. So I actually think I would put in a call here. But we'll see what happens. Maybe these two have a history where he might know, but that's a really good fold. I don't know if he has, like I said, history or a read on the situation, but maybe he feels that Mark and Chips is not a player that would bluff for a smaller size, like a smaller sizing, relatively speaking. But that's, yeah, I think he's got to call at least some of the time there. Like, it's hard for me to find enough value hands that Mark and Chips would have in that spot, or that any like recreational player would have. Like I said, typically, yes, could you get like occasional slow plays? Maybe, but in position, not as often, I think, and not with that quick of a turn check. Like, that's a pretty tricky little check by him there. But yeah, I just think it's simply a spot where, like, I don't think enough players are going to value bet one pair on the river there. Like, I think we have enough showdown value to make a call. So, yeah, I think Mr. Longlegs played the hand well. I mean, if, like I said, he made the right fold, but I think we have to call at least some of the time there. So if you guys have any questions or comments, I know this is a newer format with kind of analyzing this live as the stream goes. It's a recorded stream, obviously, but yeah, I mean, we got through some hands, we got some in-depth analysis, and if you guys have any questions or comments, go ahead and let me know. If you liked the video, then please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and come visit us over at archcitypoker.com, where we're going to have full courses set up breaking down like the entirety of streams like this, like many more hands, and breaking down some of the exploitative concepts even further for you. So you definitely get your money's worth if you're a subscriber compared to just being a free subscriber to the YouTube platform here. So appreciate you guys watching. As always, I'll see you in the next video. Thanks.